Welcome to Family Law A to Z with DBD.
Welcome to Family Law A to Z with DBD, a podcast from the Pennsylvania-based firm Deschel, Bartle, Dooley. This series reflects the collective experience of the firm's family law team, including attorneys Mark Deschel, Elizabeth Billies, and Katie Lin Daly, who work closely together to provide clear, practical guidance on the legal issues that impact your family and your future. I'm Lisa Mosbey, your host, and today we're talking about how child support works in Pennsylvania, including how it's calculated and when it can change. Joining me for this conversation is attorney Katie Lin Daly. Katie Lin focuses exclusively on family law and regularly works with clients on custody, support, and related matters. She helps families understand the process clearly so they can make informed decisions and move forward with confidence. Katie Lin, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me again.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Katie Lin, how is child support determined under Pennsylvania law?
So child support is going to look at the net income of both parents. The way that support is actually calculated is it's a giant table, and across the top of the table is the number of children that the parents share, 1 through 6. We'll get into it if there's more than 6 children. Along the side of the table is their combined monthly net income. So the most simple way to calculate support is you say, okay, me and my co-parent, our combined monthly net income is $5,000 a month, and we have 2 children. So you go down to 5,000, over to 2, that's your support number. Now, where the complication comes in is how is that number split between the 2 parents? If one parent makes $4,000 a month and one parent makes $1,000 a month, then we're allocating that support number that's in the box that we just located pursuant to the ratio that their incomes are. So if we're talking 4 to 1, it's a 4 to 1 ratio of that support number. There's a ton of different complications that can go into what actually encompasses a support number, but that's the most basic way we do it. We look at the parties' combined monthly net income, and then we look at what the guidelines calculation or the guidelines number is from that table.
And then income is it's central to any support calculation. How does the court define income for child support purposes?
So income for child support purposes is not always the same as income for tax purposes. This is a really important nuance because when you have someone who, for instance, owns a small business, they may be declaring $0 of income on their taxes. But we know that they have income because, they're paying bills, they're living, they're buying food, things like that. So we can't always just look at the parties' tax returns to determine what their income is. If we're in a super simple support case, we're looking at 2 people with W-2 income, that's going to be relatively simple. It's what's your W-2 income less the taxes that you pay, less any mandatory retirement contributions. That's all fair game in terms of income. Now, if you are somebody who, for instance, is a 1099 employee, or you're someone who works seasonally, your income is going to be a little bit more complicated, and the court is going to look at things like perhaps annualizing your income over the course of a year or over the course of 6 months to determine what you're actually bringing in. A trend that I'm noticing a lot in the courts lately is that they want to put in place support orders that the payor is actually able to pay. So if, a year ago their income was super high and now it's super low, they're not necessarily going to place the obligation on the defendant at that previously high number because they know that number is not going to be able to be paid.
And I know parenting time can affect these support payments in certain circumstances. How does the amount of custodial time factor into the calculation?
So there's really 3 tiers that we're talking about when we talk about parenting time and support. So the first tier is anything less than 40% parenting time with the person who's paying support. Anything less than 40% is not going to warrant a deviation or an adjustment from the base support order. Anything between 40 and 50% of the time is going to warrant an adjustment. And then there's a further adjustment, anything over 50% of the parenting time. Now, one misconception that I hear a lot in terms of support is, well, we have 50-50 shared custody. Why would there be a support payment at all? We have the children the same amount of time. If one parent has significantly higher income than the other parent, there is likely to be a support obligation from that higher income parent to the lower income parent, regardless of the parenting time for either of them, because that's what's best for the children. What's best for the children is to be able to maintain a lifestyle at least partly similar to what they maintained when the parents were together.
That makes sense. And then in addition to basic support, there are often additional expenses. How are items like health insurance premiums, childcare costs, and unreimbursed medical expenses handled in this calculation?
So health insurance premiums are going to be allocated between the two parents in proportion to their income. So if, let's just say, for example, dad pays $100 a month in healthcare premiums just for the child, and the parents have exactly the same income, that $100 would be assigned 50 and 50 to each parent. If the income percentages are a little bit different, then we're talking, a different percentage split. But generally, that $50 that I just used in an example is going to be included in the basic support order. So you have the basic number from the table, and then we're adding in that health insurance premium that the person is paying. If the payee, the person who receives support, is the one who pays the insurance premium, they're getting additional support because they're making the payment. If the payor is covering the health insurance, they get a credit against their support order because they're the one making the payment. Now, if we're talking about unreimbursed medical expenses on top of that health insurance premium, the payee, the person who receives support, is responsible for the first $250 of unreimbursed medical expenses per year. Those are things like medications, co-pays, maybe equipment that's necessary for like nebulizers, mobility aids, things like that. So once the payee pays their first $250 per year, any remaining unreimbursed medical expenses are allocated at that same percentage of income that we talked about before. In terms of extracurricular expenses, we're generally only talking about things that are agreed upon. So if, little Timmy always does T-ball, he does T-ball every year, it is very likely that the court is going to say little Timmy is going to continue to play T-ball, and the expenses for little Timmy's T-ball are going to be shared in the same proportion that these other expenses are being shared. Now, what the court does look at in terms of extracurricular activities is it beneficial to the child for them to do that? Is it something that the child did prior to separation? And is it reasonable for the parties in their certain situation? So if you have a situation where, parents are on the lower end of income and one parent decides to enroll their child in dressage, which is going to cost $5,000 a month, the court is not likely to allocate that expense between the parties because it's not reasonable given their situation. Now, if they make millions of dollars every year and the child has always been enrolled in dressage, that is likely to continue. Things like summer camp tuition and private school tuition would also follow the same percentage basis, provided that they are either in the court order or they are agreed by the parties.
And Katie Lin, support orders are based on current financial circumstances. What happens if a parent experiences a significant change in income, such as a job loss or a substantial increase in their earnings?
So the terms of a Pennsylvania support order include that either parent needs to advise the domestic relations section and the other parent of significant changes in income. That can include things like layoffs, like being fired, like receiving promotions, raises, new jobs, things like that. Once the other parent receives that notification, it is within their right to request a modification. If you're the payor and your income drops, you're going to be the one who wants to request a modification because you're going to need a support order that you're able to pay. Now, kind of anecdotally, if you are fired or laid off through no fault of your own and you're receiving unemployment compensation, generally the court will use your unemployment compensation as your income for support purposes.
And if a parent believes that the guideline amounts are not fairly reflected in the situation, are there circumstances where the court may deviate from the standard calculation?
There are. And oftentimes those deviations include the things that we had talked about earlier, like unreimbursed medical expenses, private school tuition, summer camp, tutoring, medical needs, things like that. The other time that we're talking major deviations is if the parent's monthly net income is more than $30,000 per month. In those situations, you have your guideline support number from the table, but then you also have to do an analysis of the children's needs. What activities are they enrolled in? What things do they need on a day-to-day basis that can bring the support number significantly higher than what's in the guidelines number?
And how does the modification process work if someone needs to request a change to the existing support order?
So either party is entitled to file a petition to modify upon a change in circumstances. That can include changes in income, like we just talked about, and it can also include changes in custody. If a child goes from one parent to the other, that is a definite basis for modification of child support. If a child is going from private school to public school or the other way around, that's also a basis for modification. Either parent can file a petition to modify support. They'll set forth what is the current support order and what changed. Did a child turn 18 and they're going to come off the support order? Did the private school tuition bump up extensively? Are we not playing football anymore and football was included in the support order? Either parent can file a petition to modify. Once a petition to modify has been filed, the court will schedule a conference, and a conference officer will take the facts and the information and run a new number.
Katie Lin, let's wrap this episode up, pulling all of this together. For parents navigating child support for the first time, what is the most important thing to understand about how the system is designed to function?
So the most important thing to understand is that child support calculators that are online are not going to be 100% accurate. It's very easy for a person to go onto the PA Skidoo website, plug in some numbers, and get a support amount that they think is correct. The nuances of support, things like health insurance, unreimbursed medical, tuition, things like that, those can all take the guidelines number off of the chart and into different territory. And a person who is not an attorney, who does not have experience in this, may not be able to navigate, well, what am I entitled to? What am I not entitled to? What can I ask for? What is the court not going to give me? Having an attorney who has the same support software that the court uses, who can analyze the party's net income available for support, who can say, this is going to be included, this particular expense, whether it's for orthodontia or for psychological care, will be included, but this expense for cosmetic surgery or for chiropractic needs, those aren't going to be included. Having somebody in your team who is familiar with the way the court system works is always going to benefit the party.
Thank you so much for your insights and the guidance that you offer through this whole process. The legal system gets complicated. And like you said, if we are not equipped, if we're not educated, it can be challenging. That's it for today's episode, folks. Thank you for joining us for Family Law A to Z with DBD. If you'd like to learn more about Katie Lin Daly or the Family Law team at Deschelle Bartle Dooley, you can visit dbdlaw.com for additional information about child support and related family matters. We also like to invite you to like, subscribe, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.